take too long and also to satisfy your intellectual appetites, hopefully. Before I start, I'd just also like to thank my professor for Professor Herschela, whose class I wrote this paper for coming. So thank you. My name is Hannah Lank, and I'll be presenting my paper, which is entitled Art Becomes Nature and Nature Art, a close reading of the Euphrastic Garden in Book 4 of Longus's Daphnis and Chloe. Reflecting on Longus's Daphnis and Chloe, Goethe once remarked that one would do well to read it every year, to be instructed by it again and again, and to receive anew the impression of its great beauty. Indeed, Daphnis and Chloe is inventive, entertaining, and complex, largely due to the unique goal of its author to produce not only a literary novel, but also an ekphrasis, and by doing so, to create a work of art. The novel is a literary project, a virtuoso piece. It is an outstanding artistic accomplishment. In this presentation, I will offer a close reading of the Ekphrastic Garden, referred to here as the Paradisos, or as Dionysius' garden that is tended by Laman, that opens Book 4. I will argue that this garden is paradigmatic of the interconnectedness of social and erotic maturation, lust and violence, and art and nature. In juxtaposition to the earlier description of Philetus's garden, the Paradisos suggests the erotic and social maturation of the protagonists. Second, it functions as the final embedded narrative, furthering the theme of lust and violence. Last, it serves as a symbol for the entire novel itself, as a meta-narrative comment on the interplay between art and nature, as well as on the inherent artificiality of narrative. The first garden presented in Daphnis and Chloe is not the Paradisos owned by Dionysius that opens Book 4, but rather it is Philetus's private garden at the beginning of Book 2. The gardens are alike in many ways. They contain similar varieties of flora, roses, hyacinths and lilies, and pear and apple trees, and are both the result of human effort, as Dionysius' garden is tended by Laman, and Philetus describes his garden as something made with my own hands. However, the gardens are ultimately set in juxtaposition with each other, particularly in the level of artistry found in each. While Philetus' garden is so natural looking that if you took away the fence, you'd think you were looking at a grove of trees, Dionysius' garden is more conspicuously a crafted entity. It is both the work of nature, but also the work of art. Philetus is proud of his ability to create a garden that does not appear to be the handiwork of human effort. He, according to Fraser, has cultivated the semblance of unadulterated natural beauty in his garden. His garden is simple and in keeping with the pastoral landscape and its corresponding attitude. In contrast, Dionysius' garden, cared for by Laman, is arranged in a deliberately complex symbolic pattern. It is suggestive of the corresponding complexity of the urban world, particularly the complexities of love and lust. Longus pays particular attention to the architecture of the flora in the Paradisos, noting that the fruit-bearing trees were on the inside, as though protected by the others. The other trees stood around them like a man-made wall, but these were enclosed in turn by a narrow fence. Everything was divided and separate, with each trunk at some distance from its neighbor. Such organization is obviously crafted and architected by human hands. The variation in the level of apparent organizational complexity for each garden allows for a comparison between the activities that occur in each. It is in Philetus' garden that Eros is first figured in the novel as a means of teaching Daphnis and Chloe the first social lessons about love. The simplicity and pastorality of Philetus' garden is in keeping with the introductory love lesson Daphnis and Chloe receive. It will be in the more complex garden, the garden with artistic urban elements, that the reality of love and sex will become clearer. Philetus tells the pair that the only cure for love is a kiss and an embrace and lying down together with naked bodies. It is a simplistic and blissfully ignorant lesson that ultimately obscures the inherent violence associated with love and lust, a prominent theme throughout the novel. It is not until later, in Dionysius' garden, that Lank violently destroys the garden's flowers when he finds out Daphnis will be marrying Chloe instead of him. This violence is symbolic both of the inherent violence associated with lust, while also foreshadowing Chloe's impending defloration, with the flowers serving as a symbol of her virginity. Violence is a complexity that Philetus omits in his benign lessons on love. Dionysius' garden therefore serves as the site for the advanced erotic and social maturation of Daphnis and Chloe. Additionally, Daphnis' ability to arrange and tend the garden will prove to his master that he is ready for marriage to Chloe. The flower garden is not only a symbol of Chloe's sexual maturation, but also of Daphnis's. Daphnis's connection to the garden is reinforced when, after Lampus's destruction of the flowers, he and his father both mourn for the flowers and for their own bodies, fearing Dionysius's impending punishment. Thus, it is more than implied that the tender garden represents not only the maiden Chloe, but also, and more overtly, the beautiful Daphnis. In this way, Philetus's garden is set in juxtaposition with Dionysius's garden, mirroring the social and sexual maturation of the protagonists and suggesting their impending entry into the complex structure of adult society. That this society is troublesome is not something Longus seeks to obscure. As Jean Alvarez states, Longus accepts some violence and oppression as the necessary, if often saddening, sacrifice one pays for becoming an adult member of society. This maturation requires leaving the relative simplicity of Philetus's introductory garden behind and facing the complex, urban, and violent elements contained and implied in Dionysius's garden, the Paradisos. In addition to serving as a juxtaposition to Philetus's simple, natural garden presented earlier in the novel, Dionysius's garden serves as the embodiment of the final embedded narrative. Daphnis and Chloe conspicuously contains one embedded narrative in each of its first 3 books. First, the myth of the metamorphosis of Pittis in Book 1, the myth of Syrinx and the origin of the panpipes in Book 2, and the myth of Echo in Book 3. Notably, all 3 involve metamorphoses, pan, and music as thematic elements. Book 4 is conspicuous in its lack of an obvious embedded narrative. However, it is possible to interpret the Shrine of Dionysus, located in the center of the Paradisos, as containing all 3 of the aforementioned themes, and therefore functioning as the 4th and final embedded narrative in the novel. The temple located in the garden is notable because it is the first religious structure presented in the novel. Also notable is the location of the temple at the center of the garden, suggestive of the importance and centrality of myth in nature and art. Longus provides the reader with an ekphrastic description of the temple. At the midpoint of the length and breadth of the garden was a temple and altar to Dionysus. Ivy surrounded the altar, and vine shoots surrounded the temple. Inside, the temple had paintings of subjects related to Dionysus: Semele giving birth, Ariadne asleep, Lycurgus in chains, Pentheus being torn apart. There were also Indians being conquered, and Etruscans changing shape. Everywhere satyrs were treading the grapes. Everywhere Bacchants were dancing. And Pan was not forgotten. He sat there too, on a rock, playing the panpipes himself, as though he were providing an accompaniment both for the treaders and the dancers. It is upon closer examination of the paintings depicted in the temple that the violence of this embedded narrative becomes clear. Importantly, Dionysus is a symbolic figure, one who is representative of many dichotomies, straddling the boundaries between violence and peace, lies and truth, man and woman. In dedicating the temple to Dionysus, Longus is furthering the theme of the interconnectedness of love and violence that he threads throughout the entire novel, notably in the increasing violence of each embedded narrative. This detail foreshadows the reality of the mature social and erotic world Daphnis and Chloe are preparing to enter. However, it is in the paintings on the temple's walls that this theme is emphasized. Each of the characters in the paintings embodies a myth that concerns some form of male-induced physical or psychosocial violence against women. The image of Semele giving birth is also the image of her death, as she was destroyed by Zeus's thunderbolts. Ariadne was abandoned by her lover Theseus after helping him defeat the Minotaur, and was later rescued by Dionysus, who also married her. Lycurgus was put in chains after he killed Dionysus' nurse Ambrosia, and then proceeded to kill his own wife and children. Pentheus was torn to pieces by his own mother, as punishment by Dionysus, who caused her to be temporarily insane and not aware of what she was doing. The paintings therefore reveal the sexual violence to women inherent to matrimony and motherhood, compelling a characterization of the temple as a structure of recollected and institutionalized violence. In this final ekphrastic embedded narrative, Longus paints a picture of the world Daphnis and especially Chloe are preparing to enter. It is not nearly as benign as the pastoral world they exist in for the entire novel. As Angela Holzmeister notes, the effect of this ekphrasis, then, affects the reading of the entire text. The hyper-alert reader is burdened by the knowledge of the future suffering that lies beyond the felicitous wedding celebration that ends the novel. In this way, Longus encourages the reader to consider the consequences of the text after its conclusion. Perhaps it is not as simplistic and joyful as a superficial reading of the text would have one believe. Furthermore, the visual depiction of Pan playing his pipes that concludes the ekphrasis of the temple is conspicuous because of the importance of music in the previous three embedded narratives. Notably, it is the only representation of music present in the Paradisos. Philetus's garden is inhabited by chirping songbirds, but Dionysius's garden has no such sounds of nature. Because of the prominent role of music throughout the novel, Silvia Montiglio suggests that the absence of music is an important detail. The music dies when love breaks into one's life and shatters its order. Love, though natural, disturbs the idyllic landscape of the novel. We can further analyze the impact of the absence of music in the Paradisos by returning to a comparison with Philetus's garden, which is filled with songbirds and is the site of Eros's appearance, who is described as being songbird-like, having a voice sweeter than a swallow's, a nightingale's, or a swan's. The description of Philetus's garden evokes a lyrical mood rather than a detailed layout of form and content. It belongs to Philetus and is not made for the delectation, the viewing of others. It is therefore suggested that there is something unnatural about the Paradisos in its carefully constructed merging of art and nature. Although beautiful, it lacks auditory elements, let alone auditory beauty, and is therefore in contrast with Philetus's garden and the former embedded narratives. Indeed, the lack of music in the Paradisos emphasizes the impending maturation of Daphnis and Chloe and the end of their simple ignorance. Music, so closely intertwined with the bucolic, does not have the same place in the complexity that is urban society. Simply put, city dwellers are not musical. Although Daphnis and Chloe are not preparing to leave the countryside, they are indeed preparing to enter into a new world of adulthood, and their erotic maturation is paralleled by their social maturation. The abrupt end to the musical details of the previous three embedded narratives, in conjunction with the violent elements portrayed in the temple's paintings, signifies the impending maturations of the protagonists. The ekphrastic garden of Book 4 also functions as a meta-narrative comment on the interplay between art and nature. It is a symbol for the entire novel itself, a means by which Longus suggests to the reader that he has successfully balanced art and nature and achieved the goal he set out for himself in creating the novel. In the prologue, Longus notes how he once discovered the most beautiful painting he had ever seen, and how he felt a yearning to depict the pictures in words, and to thus create something for mankind to possess and enjoy. Daphnis and Chloe is the result of this attempt at ekphrasis. However, there is an inevitable gap between the visual, whether a painting or nature itself, and a verbal representation of the visual. In creating the Paradisos, explicitly described as both the work of nature but also the work of art, Longus is suggesting that the two modes can be balanced, that he has successfully achieved an ekphrasis and combined the work of nature with the work of art. The garden is a conspicuous mixture of literature and life, where Longus is the master gardener who creates a garden that is a work of art and a possession to enjoy, which parodies his own opening comment about the novel. The garden is therefore a symbol for the novel itself, a meta-narrative comment on the interplay between art and nature and Longus's ability to balance the two in creating this novel. However, the garden as a meta-narrative metaphor extends beyond being an example of the adept way in which Longus combines nature and art. Notably, the Paradisos is described as being an active part of its surrounding world. Rather than being secluded, it offers a clear view of the plain, so you can see people grazing their flocks. The sea was visible too, and people sailing past were open to view. It is possible to interpret these temporal attributes in multiple ways. First, the decision to make the garden open to views of the outside world makes it inherently three-dimensional. Longus is aware of how a painting, like the one he describes seeing in the prologue, unlike a sculpture or a garden, is two-dimensional, and therefore must rely on the world for its depth. In writing a novel that is an ekphrasis of the painting, Longus is giving the painting its third dimension, depth, in the form of a narrative story. By opening up the garden to views of time passing around it, Longus creates a microcosm of what he has done in the novel as a whole, brought into juxtaposition the two art forms, temporal and spatial. Furthermore, the aesthetic choice to include views of the world outside the Paradisos supersedes its function as positing the juxtaposition of spatial and temporal settings. Indeed, the views are set up in such a way as to appear picturesque and aesthetically refined, suggesting that they are meant to appear as objects, items designed to be viewed and contemplated. If we consider the aesthetic objectification of the landscape and its inhabitants, it is clear that this is a meta-narrative comment on the novel as form. Daphnis and Chloe is a consciously crafted work of art and not a representation of reality, even though it gives the superficial appearance of being so. Longus is aware of this inherent artificiality that comes as a result of attempting to depict the multi-sensory world through narrative. Indeed, the garden itself embodies the same aesthetic objectification. It is a carefully crafted entity, designed not for personal enjoyment, though Lamon and Daphnis tended it is not theirs to enjoy, but rather so that it might be seen to be beautiful in the eyes of the beholders who come to see nature in this sanitized state. In this way, the garden serves as a metaphor for the inherent artificiality of narrative, suggesting that both its appearance and the views it offers of the surrounding world are superficial. Like a novel, the garden and the world visible from it are designed to be possessed and consumed, not to represent reality. As Froma Zeitman states, the Paradisos represents a monumentality of something that has passed from a living dynamic into a static symbol of art, a theoria, something to behold, something to contemplate, something to theorize about. It is therefore clear that the garden is a meta-narrative metaphor, a symbol through which Longus suggests to the reader that he has fulfilled the goal he set out for himself in the prologue, to create a literary masterpiece, something for mankind to possess and enjoy. The Paradisos that opens Book 4 is a sophisticated literary passage integral to the novel as a whole. It is juxtaposed to Philetus' garden, described in Book 2, as a means of emphasizing the erotic and social maturation of both Daphnis and Chloe. The garden, and specifically the temple of Dionysus located at its center, also serves as the fourth and final embedded narrative, furthering the role of myth in the novel, as well as the theme of the inherent violence involved in full erotic and social maturation, particularly institutionalized violence against women. The garden as a whole is also a symbol for the entire novel itself, functioning as a meta-narrative comment on the interplay between art and nature, as well as on the artificiality of narrative. It may be interesting to consider further what it is that Longus is suggesting in using both gardens as metaphors of love and lust. What is the nature of love, if, even in its simplest form, it can be represented by a space forged nonetheless by human hands? What are the implications of Daphnis' and Chloe's lessons on love, if their transition from idyllic love results in a harsh confrontation of the reality, notably avoided by Longus, which is painful? The ekphrastic garden is an endlessly interesting detail of Daphnis and Chloe, and merely one aspect of a novel that is hyper-aware of its artistic being and limitations. Thank you. Questions? All right, thanks.